everyone. Thank you for joining us today, where we will be talking about personalized learning. So, Zoom procedures, if you're comfortable and you're able to, turn your cameras on. If you can't, we get it. People have things going on. Please mute yourself, rename yourself, which all of you have done. So thank you very much for that. We are your team typically for our workshops that we've been doing recently, and this one on personalized learning. So Erin Altimus, my colleague Christy Kuhn, and my other colleague Debbie Pixton. So we will be delivering this information for you today. We are from the Consortium for Public Education, which means most of our focus currently in terms of our events, our programs, our initiatives all have to do with future readiness. And so really, we are an organization that's been around for over 35 years, a nonprofit based out of McKeesport. And we have a major focus, not just in future readiness, but also in engagement and equity. Our focus for the last 5 years has been really looking at how to implement future readiness within the school districts. And when we're helping students kind of prepare life for after high school and whatever path that might take, with the goal of helping students answer 3 big questions: who am I, who do I want to be, and how do I get there? Currently, we work with over 53 school districts across 9 counties in southwestern Pennsylvania, and we have almost over 80 community partners. So we work directly with students. We have programs that work with educators, and those would be teachers, counselors, administrators, as well as programs that engage partners outside of education in the business world and in the community, all in support of really trying to help our students have a more vibrant future. So today, we are talking specifically about personalized learning. What is it? What makes it up? What are some strategies that you can, implement tomorrow if you really wanted to dip your toe into this? So we're going to define and explore multiple dimensions of personalized learning, demonstrate how personalized instruction supports students' achievement and growth, and highlight several specific strategies and applications for personalized student instruction that can be done in the short term. So what exactly is personalized learning? It's really honoring the voice, the abilities, the potentials, and the dignity of each learner through relevant connections and engagement. And this is really the focus of the personalized learning working group, which is powered by Remake Learning. Debbie and I are active participants in this working group. Currently, from the group that I am with, we are working on an actual framework. So you will see components of this framework today. And Debbie is working in the advocacy and storytelling committee, and our executive director is also on the steering committee. So we do have a hand in kind of what is going on. And so we're really excited actually to, learn more about, where this goes in the future and how we make this a real relevant tool for all of our school districts. So the truth about personalized learning, because it can be kind of a scary term, is that it can be done in gradual steps, right? Like we don't have to implement this district-wide, and really just taking it slow with a few simple changes to instruction. And there are a variety of strategies that can help meet your personalized learning goals. And you can explore just one of them or many. It really kind of depends on where you are at and where your comfort level is. So these are the key elements of personalized learning. We're going to talk about specifics of flexible learning environments, learner relationships, relevant learning experiences, how do we empower our learners, what are equitable learner supports, and how our learners can demonstrate their learning. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, and he's going to discuss relevant learning experiences.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to talk a little bit about a couple elements of personalized learning. So when we talk about relevant learning experiences, we get this question a lot. Our team does a lot of project-based learning work with schools, and we get questions often about, well, how do we balance relevance, meeting students' interests, and actual rigor in our classrooms? And so the thing you need to keep in mind is relevance actually creates the conditions for rigor. If anyone's familiar with the work of Zaretta Hammond, she's done a lot in this space talking about how these two things are connected. So when you make real world connections, you're preparing students for deeper learning in your class, right? When you validate students' lived experiences, what they are learning in their classroom and both outside of school. This reinforces the idea that learning goes on everywhere. This is the kind of the, I think, my frustration with the conversation around learning loss is students are always learning, whether they're in school or not. And by validating what goes on, we are going to empower them more, because their lived experience matters. So we draw on students' prior knowledge. We ease their cognitive load. So we're talking a little bit about some learning science here. Instead of just starting with like a blank slate where they have no context, right? You want students to come in with that prior knowledge, something they can pull on. This gives them a foundation for the new learning that you're going to move them into in a new lesson, new unit. They need something, right? We don't want students to just be kind of dropped off into the deep end. All right. So let's talk a little bit about how this works. So you might have seen this graphic before, right? The learning pit. If you haven't, here's kind of how this works. When we are asking students to take on something new, they have to kind of go down into this pit. They face something that is challenging, new information, new skills they have to develop. It's hard, right? We want students to go through kind of that productive struggle, learning something new. They go down into that pit. Now, what we want is for them to have some prior knowledge, some context, some relevance to their life. So they have something to kind of a foundation to build from, because that's what gets them through. So they don't just quit, right? At that bottom, we're saying like, I'm confused and I'm stuck. We need that relevance so that students can climb their way back out, work through the process of learning, and come out with new skills and knowledge that they will retain, deeper skills and knowledge. You don't want students to fly over the pit, right? That's Googling an answer to something. Sure, they found information and there is a place for that, but like that's not going to endure. We want students to have to work through processes. But if we want them to do that, we need to make relevant connections to their lives. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. One of the strategies we recommend is project-based learning. If you're not familiar with PBL, project-based learning is an instructional approach in which students learn by applying skills and knowledge to an authentic situation, problem, or challenge. It doesn't have to be something grand. Just having students apply, a small challenge. You don't have to make grand connections to outside of your school, but something that ties into students' lives, where they actually have to not just, check a box on a test, but actually apply what they're learning. When we talk about PBL, there are a variety of elements that often fit into this process. We have a collection here. There are many out there if you're familiar with PBL Works or high quality PBL, defined learning. But the elements are generally the same. You'll see synonyms, but the idea of students having some voice and choice, right? So engaging their interests, having a big question that they tackle, and obviously that real world connection, that relevance, whether it's personal interests or something that's going on in their lives right now. Then they move into, there's elements of research, students creating ideas, getting feedback, and presenting and reflecting on what they've learned. That's the PBL process. And so PBL has a lot of, I think, usefulness in this space when you're trying to figure out how to maybe bring some relevance in your classroom. Exploring PBL projects is a great way to do that. So here's an example from the Butler Area School District. Students are applying their understanding of the environment, of life science. Elementary school students working, creating a school garden where they're actually growing things and sharing what they grow with their community. And if you read that blurb here, from the students, thinking about, when we grew kale, my students noticed something was eating the leaves. This led to an investigation, figuring out what was eating it. Students had to analyze evidence and then come up as thinking like engineers, come up with ways to change the way they're using their garden. So students have to really apply their skills in a variety of ways to something that's like very relevant to them, right? We have this garden, something's eating our food. What are we gonna do? It's real for them. And they actually have to learn and grow in a very tangible way, right? Here's one of my favorite examples from the last couple of years. And I know we have some folks on here from Greater Latrobe. Shout out to Greater Latrobe. This is a wonderful PBL project that a collection of teachers did at their high school, where students had voice and choice. They got to pick a variety of countries that had a connection to the Spanish language, Spanish-speaking countries, Spanish culture, and they were designing food trucks based on those different Spanish-speaking cultures. And it combined history and family and consumer science, entrepreneurship, obviously world languages. And students had to go work through this whole process where they had a specific budget. I think it was like $50, where they had to actually they had to do the math, they had to buy the ingredients they needed. They had to literally cook the food the day of the food truck roundup, that there's a picture here, and they had to serve it, and they were selling it to do fundraising. It hit so many different marks. It was, and so many different ways to get students engaged, right? We talk about relevance. I mean, some students might be excited about, I get to cook. Some students might have been excited about learning about the, different cultures, or the idea of like seeing like how much can we sell, who's going to like whose food better. Like there's just so many different relevant hooks for students, but obviously challenging. A lot of different skills they have to develop and juggle, and time management. There's just so much baked into that project. And not every PBL project has to be this way, but it's such a great exemplar of the potential to draw so many different skills, so much content, and so many good hooks to draw students into their learning. So if we're talking about relevant learning experiences for students, something you do just next week, right? You're not going to necessarily, you're going to plan a whole PBL project. Something you can do, survey your students, learn about their interests if you haven't already done so this year. See what are some of the activities that you might be able to draw on to make more relevant connections in your classroom. Look for opportunities for students to share about their lives. It doesn't have to be anything huge, just a little bit of time for students every once in a while to talk about things that they're doing, ask curious questions, so you can get some direction on where you might build more of their interests and more of their curiosity into what you do in your classroom, no matter the content area. And then look at your lessons and think about where might you make some new connections, because even a small connection can go a long way for giving students that foundation they need for the content you're tackling. Okay. Number 2, flexible learning environments. Sarah reminded me this morning, this is a great way to frame this. When we talk about flexible learning environments, we talk about time, place, and space. So we're going to break this down to 3 different lenses. When we talk about flexible spaces, I love this concept of built pedagogy. So the idea that built pedagogy represents, the architectural embodiment of our educational philosophies. That kind of blew me away. The way we design our spaces, our learning spaces, reflects some of our own philosophies around how we think about instruction, right? And I know we don't always have control. We're going to talk about that a lot, because we have limited resources. We have limited power in our spaces, sometimes in our classrooms, but there are always things we can do. And to be reflective of the fact that how your space is designed can have a big impact. Right? So if you think about it, what does your classroom say about learning? How are your desks set up? Where are you positioned most of the time? Do students have an opportunity to work together? Do they have any voice and choice in where they sit? Think about that. When you go back to your space, if you're in your space right now, what are some of the designs that you have built in? And how do they reflect the way that you provide instruction? I thought, because there's often a lot of, I think, some biases around when we talk about flexible classrooms, what that has to be. I want to show this quick video just to give some added context. It's a great video from Edutopia.
If you guys want to work independently, what is going to be the best place?
We realized if we were trying to have kids communicate engage in collaborative work, focus on critical thinking. The dominant teaching model where everybody's sitting at a desk facing the wall, teacher up front, was not going to work.
Flexible space gives them the opportunity to learn in different ways. You may see students in a circle and having a dialogue, or you might see a teacher floating around and giving one-on-one support to kids.
When a teacher doesn't have to be in the front of the room, they can make choices with their curriculum. Students don't all have to be learning the exact same thing at the same time.
If you're going to work independently to catch up, you'll actually turn the tables toward that wall. Those who want the mini lesson are going to come to this table.
Everybody ready? Please write that down. Compare and contrast.
So when we give our kids choices in that environment, that provides them with the opportunity to make decisions about the things that they really need to be successful in school.
Just using the facts. Yes. Love it.
Thanks so much for sharing, Emily. Appreciate that. And it's nice to hear that folks are excited, right? Let's change things up. Let's make the shifts that we need to have our spaces align better with the needs of our students and the instructional practices we want, right?
Special shout out to Emily, who's also on the working group for personalized learning. And she's like an ace at this flexible learning environment. So she got a lot to share with us.
So there's a lot of different ways you can slice that kind of flexible classroom space. You notice not all those spaces were the same. Some of them, they were just tables and chairs. And, the teacher took advantage of saying like, all right, we are going to move some of these over here. We're going to shift the space live right now. We're going to do some rearranging. We're going to set this up if you want to work in groups over here. If you don't, you can be over here. You don't have to have a ton of different furniture to make a shift in how instruction is happening in different areas of your room and meeting students in different spaces, right? What I have up on the screen right now is actually from a project a couple of years ago. Students at the Brownsville School District, they were helping to reinvent their space. It was their library, and they wanted to turn it into a future-ready or career readiness space. And so they were redesigning that space to be more flexible to meet a variety of needs, because career readiness can take on a lot of different aspects, right? So not having your traditional library space, they redesigned it this way. And so if you hop to the next one, Sarah, the students, we're talking about personalized learning, the students helped lead the work. They used human-centered design, which we will talk about shortly. Debbie will cover human-centered design as a tool you can use for personalizing learning. But the students worked through this process with their teachers, and they even went out. You'll see the picture on the left. They're actually meeting with an architect to talk about design. They're like, we don't know anything about architecture. Like, what should we do? Let's go talk to someone. It was, again, relevant, engaging. The students were able to take a lead on a lot of this work and bring their ideas into the process. Now, I want to give a little clarifier here. There's two pictures here. There's a link when you get the slide deck. There's a link here as well you can click on. These two pictures are examples of ways to break up a space. I recognize that this is like modern furniture. This is new stuff. The reason I put these in here and the reason I have the link is because there are a lot of different ways you can rearrange a classroom. You don't have to have fancy desks. You don't have to have special chairs. But if you're looking for inspiration, the website for this has literally like 100 designs. If you're looking at a variety of different ways to just move things around your room to tackle different kinds of challenges, if you want to rearrange a room for creativity versus students doing research, or you name it, they have probably a layout for it. So you ignore the fancy furniture if you can, but it's just a really great space. Like, I don't have a great vision in my head of like how I would want to rearrange my room for a variety of purposes. I need some help. And so this website helps me think about a lot of different ways that we do flexible spaces. And this is a media center. And then obviously, more of a classroom space. If you want to redesign and have like stations, you have workspaces for students where they're collaborating. You can see there, you have spaces for students where they can be working more independently, where they can focus. If you have students who are working in partners, there's a lot of flexibility. And even coming from a classroom, if you have your traditional chair and desk connection, you can still make a lot of these kind of layouts happen if you're creative. You have some old shelves, you can move desks around, you can still do that. But if you're looking for inspiration, check out this website. I think it's a great resource just for sparking thinking. And so while this is all really great for students, it's also really, really empowering for educators. Something to keep in mind, while instructors may often think about their pedagogies as shaping the space, there's research that suggests that with the spaces that they have also has a huge impact on the pedagogical choices they make. So the spaces we're in, the way we design a room can limit us too, right? It can hinder some of the instruction we might want to provide. So there's a kind of a reciprocal relationship to this kind of flexible space, okay? I'm not going to show this video, but when we talk about, time and place and space, learning can happen, as I said earlier in the relevance piece, like learning can happen anywhere. Think about the spaces you have on your campus, around your building, your surrounding neighborhood, if possible, the hallways outside of your classroom. There are so many places your students can learn that doesn't have to be your class proper. And this is a great example from an elementary school where they are using their surrounding campus to do a ton of learning about their environment. Check it out when you have a chance. And this is actually an example from when I was a teacher in the Wilkinsburg School District. We used our neighborhood. We were one school building. We had 7 through 12 students there. It's an old building, an old neighborhood. And one year we had a grant to get iPads. And so students, when we were teaching ELA, students were able to go out in the neighborhood, take pictures. We use it as like photo essays. Students could go around and just use a lens to think about their neighborhood where maybe they might just be walking down the street. Otherwise, this was an opportunity for them to go and just actually observe and capture things, and then they would write about it. So they weren't used to using my classroom, which was pretty small. We used the space around our building, right? So you also have things, ideas you can use in terms of flexible time. Not every lesson has to be taught live. You can use virtual tools, set adjustable deadlines. There's a lot of research that shows giving students a little bit of extra time, if they need it, is great. If you give students 2 weeks, maybe not, they may not turn in as much work. But having flexible deadlines, adjustable deadlines, like we have mostly as adults, there's a great resource here as well that kind of highlights that. We have flexibility as adults. We should look for opportunities to give that to students, at least in small pieces. Things like revisions, giving students an opportunity to go back, even if they're already got, they took the test or they did the paper, go back and have some flexibility in terms of just reworking it, turning it back in, getting a new grade. If we want a growth mindset for students, we have to give opportunities to grow. Grades can't be final, right? Yeah. Things like, so then we have kind of broader things. I know some folks, you don't have control over this, but if you're looking for a target, if we have school leaders here, things like flexible scheduling. If you're not familiar, something like mods. So we'll show an example here in a sec, but modular scheduling where you have a mod is 25 minutes, 2 mods is 50-minute classes, 4 mods could be an hour and 40. But use mods to kind of piece together these schedules to meet the needs of different classes. I'm sure if we have any science teachers on here or trying to set up labs, it would probably be better if you didn't have a 40-minute class period, right? But not everyone needs an hour and a half. So some schools use these mods to create flexible scheduling. Here's an example. So this comes from River Bluff High School. They have a modular scheduling. If you want to dig into this, they have a whole website devoted for it, or webpage devoted to it. But you can see here, different classes have different lengths of time. Not everything is the same length. Some, they put a couple mods together for some classes, some of them just one. And then students on their schedules have, every once in a while, they have independent learning time. So sometimes they just have 20, 25 minutes where they don't have class. Little bits, right? Little pieces of freedom, okay? And there are a lot of benefits to this. So they talk about this explicitly on their website. It builds trust with students. It creates a spirit of collaboration because students have a little flexibility to go and talk to other teachers in their independent time. They have access if they need help, right? It gives them time. It gives students flexibility to just finish some work. If they need to get caught up, they can go to the gym. They can, if they have if they have their laptops, they have an issue, they can go take care of that with the tech person. It also eliminates some of that, students getting out of class time. It gives them some time to go and just take care of some other things that aren't content related, and builds some skills for students because they have to learn how to work within that kind of flexibility. It's a really interesting concept, but it is a bit of a target. I know that's a little out there, but wanted to highlight that. So if you're not going to create a modular schedule next week, what are some things you can do? Well, you can re-examine your space, your learning space, right? With a critical eye. How might you rearrange your furniture? Even if you don't have brand new furniture, you're working with those old desks, how can you move things around a little bit to facilitate some more collaboration with students, or a space for students who might just need some independent time and no distractions? Think about the different kind of instruction you want to bring to bear in your classroom. How might you change that a little bit? Okay. And think about some of the spaces beyond your classroom, where there are opportunities, even if it's just down the hall, just outside the building. Where can you start to bring in learning outside of just your four walls?
Okay, number 3, since we're keeping track. Empowered learners. All right, so thinking about this aspect of personalized learning, the idea of empowered learners, what does that mean? So we want our students to have the opportunity and the ability to own their learning. We want them to know that they actually have agency in their learning experience. And we want students who can verbalize their interests and strengths. So if I'm thinking about how do I empower my students, or what are empowered learners, this is what I want. I want students to know that they have some choice, they have some agency, and they can share what they are interested in and what they care about. So why does this matter? You probably all could agree that we do want our students to feel empowered. We don't want a power struggle, but we want our students to be able to make a decision, to have the ability to make decisions, and to follow through with that. And so if we are thinking about empowering our learners, this is, honoring our students' perspectives as essential to within the learning environment. It's not just about me, the instructor, telling my students everything and making all of the decisions for them. It invites my students to embrace their unique skills and experiences as part of their learning journey, right? Not every student is the same, and I can appreciate that and acknowledge that and give students space to share that about themselves. And it amplifies the identities and cultures and experiences and values that are different from those of the instructor, right? Because my classroom, if it is just teacher-centered, then it's just a reflection of me, my desires, my strengths, not all of my students' strengths and interests. So how can we empower our students? We can provide them opportunities to make appropriate choices, to pursue their interests, and to demonstrate their uniqueness. Now, when we talk about choices and freedom and agency, we're not talking about the beach. I'm not saying, students, go, learn what you want. You are your own master. No, I'm saying, students, here's your sandbox. Here is a place for you to play, for you to make decisions. It is within the parameters that I, as your educator who is the expert on this, I have set up these parameters because I know what my students are capable of, what they're able to do. So it's not beach, it's sandbox. Now, one way that you can incorporate a strategy you can use to empower your learners more is to create choice boards. So you might know what a choice board is. It's essentially saying, instead of everybody is doing this same assignment or everybody is taking the same test, I'm giving you some options for how you can learn about a thing or demonstrate what you have learned. So these are examples of elementary choice boards. I think they're both, the first one is space for elementary students. So learning about the Earth and different planets. And then the other one is an SEL choice board. And so they were giving an option to say something nice to somebody, make a card for somebody. And so the key with choice boards is that when you are providing your students then that sandbox, right? So I've made the choice board. I have thought about what my students' needs are. Well, we're going to talk about universal design in a little bit. So I've thought about what are the different ways that my students need to engage with information, how they can express what they've learned, how they can demonstrate this learning to me. And so I've put thought into that and also considered my students' varied needs. So, I've gotten to know my students a little bit. I know some of the things that they're interested in, and I can incorporate that into my choice board. Now you can make a choice board for, I was a high school English teacher, so I could have done a choice board for, every journal assignment. Here's your choice board. We're using the same choice board all year. You don't need to make choice boards for, every week and every little assignment, but make them a little bit broader so that you can utilize them numerous times in your classroom. Another way to help us empower our learners is to utilize Genius Hour. So in case you don't exactly know what Genius Hour is, here's the 3 steps. One is that students begin with a question that's driven by their interest and passion, and it's not easily Googleable, right? So what is the different distance between Earth and Mars? That's I can easily Google that. That's not a question that I need to dig into, right? Step 2, once we've got a good question that my students are looking into, then they're going to do some research on their question and begin to construct some answers or prototype some solutions. And then they share their findings, answers, ideas, and products. And the idea of Genius Hour comes from companies like Google, and I think Apple and a couple other companies like that who told their employees you have 20% of your time in your work week to pursue whatever you want. And just engage in your passion. And so the idea of Genius Hour is that you give students a specific time. Generally, it comes at the end of the day. It's the way schools do it, for the students to just explore any idea they want. So we have a few videos. I think I'm just going to skip all of the videos, but if you can go to the next slide. Oh, no, you want me to, should I show a little bit? Okay. All right, go to the next slide, Sarah, please. And yeah, we'll watch about 30 seconds of this. This is a teacher. So he had an elective in his middle school where his students basically did Genius Hour for a semester. So every day for a semester. And he made this really fun little vlog of showing what his students were doing. So go ahead and play that, Sarah.
All right, guys, today, my vlog, we're gonna take a little tour of the 8th grade Tower Talks. And this is a 8th grade elective that they've been working on for a semester. These ideas, these concepts, it's really truly a passion project. And I'm so excited to come along for the ride and check it out and have you with us. So without further ado, let's go.
So he just walks through what each of his students was working on in this class.
Yeah.
We can stop you here. Thanks, Sarah. I've loved the way his excitement and that he's able to share. So here, that's the teacher demonstrating engagement, right? And demonstrating with his audience and his stakeholders what he's learned from working with his students. Now, this next video we will skip, but this is students who were participating, middle school students in a regular Genius Hour, end of the school day, students got to work on whatever. And so they were asked to, as part of their Genius Hour, they have to share what they learned and what they accomplished in their Genius Hour. So demonstrating what they've learned, they are empowered, they've made the choices. This is about what they want to learn. Go ahead. We're also skipping this video, but I wanted you to have it. All right, we can play it. This is a teacher who she put together a little video for her students to help them choose topics for Genius Hour, because that can be a little bit daunting. Like, how do I know what I'm interested in? And so she prompted them with a couple of different questions and lots of ideas. So this is something that you could replicate in your classroom, or you could just use this. So, and that video goes on for quite a while. She really gives her students a lot of questions to think about. So, I mean, I think when we think about how we can do this in our classrooms, could you create a choice board, or could you go online and find one and then alter that to fit your needs for your classroom? Is there, could you make one for your upcoming assignments? Looking at your upcoming lessons, where can you add just a little bit of choice for your students? Maybe not everybody reads the same text. Maybe we give them 2 or 3. Maybe we give them the opportunity to engage with a video or a book. And would it be possible to implement a small scale version of a Genius Hour in your classroom? What if you played around, with the idea that on Fridays, we get to have Genius Hour in our classroom? So just a few things to think about. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I almost forgot to unmute myself before I started talking. So, hi everybody. We're on number 4 now. We're going to talk about learner relationships. And if you haven't already caught on, there is a lot of overlap between and among the 6 elements for personalized learning. And so you're going to see that quite a bit in the pieces that we talk about here, partially because relationships are a part of what we do as educators, as with our students, with our families, with our colleagues. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. So I wanted to start with this quote about why we care about relationships, just how much that the relationships you have with your students impact what they're able to do, how much they're engaged, and the skills that they come out with. So I won't read it to you, but that's really part of why we feel like learner relationships are so key to being able to personalize learning, right? If you know your students, you can better personalize their learning. You know what's going to make them tick, what's going to get them excited, what will help really make that learning impactful for them. Now, as most of you know, we are big fans of human-centered design, which is a way to accomplish many of some of these different elements, but also is really key in helping cultivate the skills necessary for learner relationships to flourish. And if you're not familiar with it, human-centered design is a process for using empathy to develop solutions in the service of people. So in an education context, that means that if you know your students well, your content and your instruction will be better aligned to their interests and needs. Now, there are literally hundreds of HCD methods that you can use in your context. Because this is an 1.5-hour time slot, we're just going to quickly, thank you, Aaron, 101 design methods. There you go. He will tell you every book you might possibly want to read to discover all of the methods. But we're just going to cover 3 right now to think about how they might help you cultivate those learner relationships. The first one is Rose Thornbud. I think most of you are familiar with it, a way to really gather balanced student input, both in terms of making sure that your most boisterous students and your most reserved students have an opportunity to provide input, but also to make sure that that input isn't all positive or all negative or all just ethereal questions that you might or might not ever want to answer. So in Rose, Thorn, Bud, you usually have your roses. Those are your positives. We tend to use Post-its for this process. So your pink Post-its, you can also use stickies on a Jamboard. If you're doing it virtually, we use it on Padlet too. Your blue Post-its are your negatives. Those are your thorns. We always think of blue as bad. And then your buds, your opportunities, or your potentials are those green Post-its. Those are your spaces for growth. What we love about Rose, Thorn, Bud is that it is incredibly versatile, both in terms of its topical and content area application, the particular challenge you might be facing, but also kids as young as first grade. We have used this method with that. What you're seeing right now are first graders using Rose, Thorn, Bud and a complementary method called Affinity Clustering to provide feedback on their experience in the school cafeteria. You can see in the middle picture that they had some negatives and some opportunities, ways they could improve the waiting in line experience. And that picture on the right, they're talking about tables, like they have opportunities to improve the seats. I can't tell if the one on the bottom is that they don't like the food or they don't like the ketchup. But either way, great to be specific in your feedback. And clearly they have some nice stuff in their cafeteria as well. So of course, it's not limited to first graders. We use it with adults. And on this next slide, you can see this is a completed Rose, Thorn, Bud within an affinity cluster that 8th grade students did to provide feedback on a PBL project at Manchester Academic Charter School. And while we don't have an adult example, obviously adults can use it as well. Really intuitive and valuable way to make sure that your feedback is useful and helps you get to know what your students are actually thinking or any of your stakeholders that you might be working with. The next method is a dot vote, which really emphasizes student choice and collaborative decision making. We've talked about student choice already a few times today. It's very simple. You take all the choices that you have, you make sure that they're visible in one easy to access place. You want everyone to review them. Usually we do it with stickers, make sure they're identical stickers, right? Because you want this to be anonymous to try and eliminate bias as much as you can. And you have students simultaneously vote using their sticker. You can use it on overall concepts or overall decisions, or you can use it on specific elements of a particular idea, or you can do a combination. So you can vote on an overall concept, but also I like this idea from this other piece, this other idea as well. So then you can come up with an even better idea in the end that reflects what everyone's thoughts and ideas are. Really critical to make sure that the votes are simultaneous, because, just think about anytime you're in a room with an administrator pretend you went to a meeting with the president. If the president voted first, you might be unwilling to put yourself out there and say, hey, I disagree, or no, your idea isn't the best. And especially with our students, middle school students, they don't tend to want to be on the outside. They want to make sure that they are on par. Yes, I love what's on your radar. That is another great method for making sure you know what people are thinking, what is literally on their radar. So thanks for that, Emily. And then our third method for this section, again, because we only have time for 3, is about interviewing, which really we use for empathy building and information gathering for any kind of audience. I want to make sure that interviewing is not, we tend to have this perception that interviewing is just for job interviews, or that it's only very formal, it's research-based, it's, very, very structured and limiting in some capacity. But interviewing can be a really great way to gather nuanced information from your students or from others that you might not be able to collect any other way. A couple of key things to think about when you're interviewing is to make sure you know what information you need and why, and who has that information. So if you're trying to build relationships with your students, obviously they have the information, but why do you need the information that you're going to gather? And that will help you determine which questions to ask. One thing that you have to really watch, and every time we talk about interviewing in a training, People struggle with this piece, and that's not to include your own stories or to ask leading questions, right? When you're in a conversation, it's very natural to ask a question and someone tells you something and then you respond, oh yeah, that happened to me and blah, 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 blah. But that skews the interview, because then you're taking the validity of the person's story away from them. So you want to make sure that you leave your own stories for another time, not because that can't help also build relationships, but because an interview is about gathering that information and making sure that I'm clear on what you're feeling and experiencing. And Erin actually reminded me this morning to make sure that interviewing doesn't have to be in a formal setting, and reminded me of an example with a district that they were having trouble getting information from every population in their district. There was a neighborhood of families that they felt like they couldn't get them to come to any school events. They couldn't, they didn't show up at things. And so we talked about setting up a protocol just with a few questions for them to think about, what do I really need to know from those families? What would really help us make better decisions if we knew what they thought? And so they came up with like a 3-question protocol that they just have those questions kind of in their back pocket. And if one of them happens to come to the school for any reason, all the administrators know to try and pull that person to the side. Hey, how are you? What brings you in today? Hey, could you tell me what you think? We're thinking about metal detectors. Like, what are you thinking about that? And get that input. They have a Google form on an iPad that after the conversation, they can quick record it and the context for which they got the information. And now they're able to supplement whatever other surveys or interviews or focus groups that they've done to make sure that they include the experiences of people in that neighborhood that are living differently, different lives, have different circumstances than other folks in their district. So just thinking about how to make interviewing accessible, you can use that same strategy with your students in a less formal, like, hey, tell me about your weekend and, what did you do? Don't ask them if it was fun, because maybe their weekend wasn't fun. But making sure you have some questions in your back pocket, and how are you going to use them so that you can make sure that your learning reflects the experiences they're having and what their preferences might be. The other thing about interviewing, we have 3 magic phrases that if you learn nothing else about interviewing, I think they are incredibly powerful in making them more impactful. The first one is why, or tell me more about that. Really helps you make sure that you understand, gives you more context. If you had a magic wand or in a perfect world, what would that look like? What would that be? Really helps you understand what an ideal state would be, and how it's different from what the current situation is. And then tell me a story about that. Helps make sure that you understand the specifics of what that person's experience has been like, so that you can really respond appropriately. Now we have about 20-ish videos on a variety of HCD explainer videos that will help you if you are interested in HCD and need more specifics on how to implement them in a variety of contexts. We are nerds about this, and we love to apply it to education in particular, whereas other folks tend to apply it more broadly. So hopefully you can find those to be useful to you. Now, HCD is not the only way to help build learner relationships. One of the things in the framework from KnowledgeWorks is about building social connections. One way to do that is through group mentoring, where students engage with and learn from a variety of mentors. Thank you, Christy, for putting together this slide. It allows students to have the opportunity to choose which mentors they have and would like to work with more closely. It gives you a lot of flexibility for students as their interests and needs evolve, and also just based on logistics, like who can come today, who's sick today, right? Make sure that there's always someone ready to engage, and it creates a network as well as social capital for the students involved. Now, there are lots of ways to help students check in on their level of social emotional wellness, which is another aspect of this part of the framework. Now, one way to do that as kind of benchmarking is with an SEL screener tool. There are 2 on this slide that are free that you can kind of grab and use at your disposal. I do not recommend using these on a daily basis, but they can provide you with some information to kind of help see where your students are at starting the year, maybe as a midpoint or end of year check to make sure that students are well and learning and adapting and coping with the various things that happen in their lives. And then the last piece for this section, if any of you were at SAS the last week, was it last week, guys? So many things. You got to hear from Dr. Joe Sanfilippo, the superintendent of Fall Creek School District. He actually also presented at SAS the year before. But one thing that really struck me at SAS was when he said, when students know they belong, you change the lives of kids, you change the directions of families. And so when we talk about the sense of belonging, which is a part of learner relationships, we want to make sure that we know why cultivating that sense of belonging is important, right? It helps with higher engagement from your students, right? All, of course, important for personalizing learning. You do benefit from fewer behavioral incidents and stronger academic achievement. And even though you cannot be solely responsible, you can intentionally help foster that sense of belonging for students. A few quick ways that you can do that: you make introductions, use names, make sure you know how to say your students' names, ask your students how they are and listen to the answers, ask follow-up questions, which is hard to do when you're so busy, but makes a huge difference for if your students feel like they're valued and a part of your classroom, your school community. When you can, solicit and use input from your students, give them something to be responsible for and allow them to demonstrate that they're trustworthy. And then provide undivided attention to each student, even for a minute, recognizing them, greeting them by name, saying goodbye to them, looking them in the eye to make sure that they know that you saw them today can really go a long way in helping foster that sense of belonging. So a few things you can do next week: find a way to allow students to have voice and choice. It doesn't have to be big, it can be small. Plan for all your students to engage in feedback and decision making. Again, feel free to start small. This doesn't have to be feedback on everything you've ever taught them. Like, what'd you think of this unit? What'd you think of this activity? Use that rose thorn bud to get their feedback. Don't let them just say it was terrible. Tell me why. Teach them about kind, specific, and helpful feedback. And then if you can, find one way to individually engage your students each day. And again, start small, because those small pieces really help build towards a greater sense of community and belonging. So with that, I think I'm passing back to Christy. Aaron thinks that you all need a 5-minute break. I see him doing the hands.
Is that all right?
Yeah,
I think that's fine. So if you want a 5-minute break, go ahead. We will restart in 5 minutes at 2 o'clock. Yes, thumbs up from the team.
Yeah,
very good.
Wrap up those last two. Yeah.
All right, we are going to talk about equitable learner supports, which is number 5. So when we are now I just have the count in my head from Sesame Street. Anyway, so when we're thinking about equitable supports for our learners, it's how can we create some structure, some strategies and processes that are actually going to help all of our learners, not just the maybe traditional high flyers or the traditional, students who need this extra help. I know how to do this, but how do we, approach everybody's needs? So we like to use universal design for learning. So this provides, the idea of UDL is that you provide multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression. Now there's a website, it has all of this stuff, but it really comes down to that, thinking about how can I provide multiple options for the why, the what, and the how of learning. All right, now this is a video by John Spencer, which actually explains it much better than I ever could, and it's fun to watch. So we're gonna watch this.
In the early 1960s, visionary architect Selwyn Goldsmith designed the initial curb cut, or dropped curb, to encourage people with limited mobility to have access to city sidewalks. Now, this was part of a larger movement led largely by disability advocates toward universal access in the built environment. This would be done by changing policies, systems, and structures to promote full inclusion. In the last few decades, architects, product developers, and UX designers have embraced this philosophy of universal design. Coined by the architect Ronald Mace, universal design is built on the core belief that we should design environments to be usable by all people without the need for adaptation or specialized design. This inclusive approach allows everyone to benefit from such designs. Hence, caregivers pushing strollers will benefit from curb cuts. Similarly, viewers use closed captioning on videos regardless of their hearing. In other words, when you design for everyone, everyone benefits from the design. Universal design for learning applies the same philosophy of universal design to every aspect of learning, from learning spaces to materials to instruction and assessment to classroom culture and behavior management. Built around cognitive neuroscience, UDL is an inclusive educational framework that seeks to remove barriers while also keeping the learning challenging for all students. This UDL approach includes a paradigm shift from a deficit mindset to neurodiversity, and from singular accommodations to universally accessible scaffolds and support, and from a teacher-centric view to a student-centered approach centered on student agency. In the 1990s, Dr. David Rose and the Center for Applied Special Technology, or CAST.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah is in control of all of our videos today. So UDL, that's what she's our puppet master. The UDL website that is here at the bottom goes through, a lot more information about each of these. How can I provide multiple means for engagement, representation, action, and expression? It can be a lot to look at, but I'll take you to the next slide. On that website, or I'm sorry, on the CAST website, they also have these lesson plans that are already done, already completed on a variety of topics and in a variety of grade bands. And they have these little pop-outs that tell you within this lesson where there's a UDL connection. So when you go to this website, you'll just, click the lesson plan you're interested in, and then these little, center 4 graphics, center 3 chart, you click those and it talks to you about what is the UDL connection. So that can be helpful for you as you're maybe thinking about how might I use a few UDL, strategies in my classroom without, completely revamping everything I'm doing. So as you saw in the video, universal design for learning it creates an equitable space for our students. It pushes us to use instructional practices that are more equitable for our learners. And this is based on scientific research. It's not just because we think it's fun. And the framework of UDL gives concrete suggestions that can be applied for any age level and any content area. And it's important that we push ourselves as educators to think outside of our own head and our own experiences, because we all have biases, right? So English teacher, I want everybody to read all the books and write all the papers. That's what I want. I'm like, that's how people learn. No, people learn in a variety of ways. And so I have to remove myself from my English teacher bias. And, maybe not everybody wants to learn about Shakespeare, and maybe that's okay, right? And Sarah knows it is. We've talked about this at length. We're a bunch of nerds over here. But it pushes me to think about, okay, maybe my students can engage with this material from a variety of aspects. What material am I missing totally? Are there authors that I've skipped because I've been caught up in, well, these were the ones I learned. So pushing me to think outside of my own experiences, it makes my classroom a much better place, and it makes it a better place for all of my students. I think a good example, this past semester, I did a choice board writing assignment for my students. I wanted to get to know them. They got to choose, from 20 prompts, they got to choose 5 to answer. And I had a question in there about if you would like to share your neurodiversity story. I purposely put that in there because I was thinking about the fact that I often have students who are on the spectrum. The students who engaged with that question just wanted to talk about how they felt more diverse than their peers. And so it gave everybody a space to talk. So when we design for everyone, everyone benefits. This voice and choice, it pushes equity. That's what, I feel like I already said everything, so we can just skip that slide. Equity, it matters. Now, what can we do next week to create more equitable learning supports for our students? Could you maybe add 1 or 2 resources to a lesson or unit to provide multiple means of representation? Could you reflect on your current learning outcomes? Can we help our students demonstrate mastery in more than one way? You could, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a test. It doesn't have to be a paper. Maybe my student wants to make a recording. Maybe they want to draw a picture, right? And you come up with the constructs that enable them to make those choices while still meeting the same rigor as all of the other students.
I feel like I should do like the count 6. Last one. All right, everyone. Demonstration of learning. Thanks for that intro, Christy. It really kind of moves nicely. So how can we provide different ways for our students to demonstrate their learning? Because currently traditional grading does not encourage a growth mindset. Once they've taken that test, then what? So what we want to do is give different avenues and different opportunities for our students to demonstrate all of their learnings, because as Christy said, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and to allow our students the space to present our learnings in a way that makes sense to us is, beneficial, right? It creates a more student-centered environment. So one of the ways that you can do that, which is like big systems level, is to look into competency-based learning. So competency-based systems clearly define what needs to be learned and how students can progress towards learning that. So it's very masterly based. It's going to allow for multiple pathways to acquiring and demonstrating mastery. Now, this could be done in forms of internships or apprenticeships, right? Which we've seen those, but also like asynchronous coursework, right? If the pandemic taught us anything, some students really like working on their own. And when they are in school, they cannot always do that, right? So where is there a space that, we could offer up something like that for those students? It also provides opportunities for students to progress towards mastery of content at their own pace, which is extremely important. We all don't learn in a vacuum, all going at the same rate. It's taken me years to figure out how to apply fractions, right? Baking. But that doesn't mean that, in 5th grade, I totally understood what in the world fractions were and how I was going to use them. So we all learn differently, and we all learn at our different pace. And so this allows us students space to, learn at a rate which makes sense to them. And it really emphasizes the demonstration of mastery and the application of that knowledge, right? I'm not just taking in content and spitting it out. I'm applying it to something. So the best way to kind of look at this is to compare. In a traditional education setting, when we talk about assessments are used to evaluate and sort students. And typically we have high stakes standardized tests that are at the end of the year. Assessments are anxiety driven for our kids at that point. When we talk about grading, grades reflect the standards of the individual course and teachers, right? You could have 2 teachers teaching the same course, and a B could mean different for each of them. In terms of mastery, the students are expected to master state grade level standards, right? So all 3rd graders are all at the certain level of mastery. And then in terms of pace, your students are advanced at a pace determined by the educator, not by themselves. And regardless of mastery, because we know that a grade that is a D doesn't necessarily mean that the students have mastered that content. So if we were to look at competency-based, assessments are used more as a tool. And they help guide daily instruction and demonstrate student progress towards achieving competencies. Students are given and they're evaluated when they're ready to be evaluated. Not everybody gets the same multiple choice test at the same time, and given a variety of ways, again, to UDL, to demonstrate their skills. And in terms of grading, grades illustrate the student's level of mastery in specific competencies. And those competencies are rigorous and they are aligned to state standards, and they incorporate knowledge and skills that are going to be essential for students' futures. And the pace is really dictated by the student. You know, when a student masters a certain competency, it doesn't matter if it's, you know, on grade level, below or above. They've mastered it, they now move on. And there's supports in place to help these students sort of move along so that everybody graduates on time. So the elements of competency-based learning are really that the students advance upon the demonstrated mastery. Competencies include explicit, measurable, transferable learning objectives that empower students. And assessment is meaningful. And most importantly, it is positive and not anxiety-inducing for our kids. Because assessment should be a way to gather feedback, right? So that next time I can do better. I'm demonstrating what I have learned by taking this assessment. So though competency-based learning and, you know, implementing that within a district is really high level, there's definitely ways that you can take aspects of this and implement it in terms of using rubrics and checklists within your assessments. So rubrics are wonderful because, one, they've been proven to decrease anxiety in our students. They clarify project and educator expectations. They provide guidance and direction, and they're going to enhance learning outcomes, right? Your students are asked to demonstrate mastery of a particular, let's say, skill or learning outcome. And really, what rubrics should do, because they're a bit more granular than competency-based learning, is that they're going to encourage the performance of student understanding and really be a tool for student growth. Again, for like reflection, how have I been doing? What have I learned from this? How can I, you know, do better next time? Not task completion, which is oftentimes where our rubrics can go. And I think that it is something to be aware of. So really what rubrics should not do is they should not score more than one learning outcome at a time without recognizing them as separate skills. So that's something, if you're looking at a rubric and you're asking your students to, you know, be able to do two things and it's all within one line, yeah, split those up. They also should not score non-relevant features, you know, because things like neatness and color are very subjective. What neatness looks like to me is going to be different than what neatness looks like to Christy, right? If we were to both draw a picture, let me tell you, hers is going to look better than mine is. It doesn't mean that they are not appropriate, right? So it's also, you know, relates back to the whole idea that students, educators have their own likes and dislikes, and you can have differences between educators that are teaching the same class. So we want to make sure that, you know, those non-relevant features are taken out. And students shouldn't score something in a way that counts up parts or components, and that items that students have not been made aware of, and that they score products rather than learning outcomes, right? So when we're talking about rubrics, it is just a way for students to demonstrate their mastery, and there's a way that you can create your rubric to make sure that that actually does happen. So what rubric should do is push student learning forward. Students should actually be able to see how they can get from one performance level, meaning novice, or maybe that's a 1 on your rubric, to meeting, or that's a 3 on your rubric. And they shouldn't be judging that process, right? Is the student doing that? Cool. The student should be able to see, if I want to get from a 1 to a 3, this is what I need to do, and this is what is expected of me. And it also provides an opportunity to give actionable feedback, right? This is how our students learn. This is how they can determine how they're going to demonstrate their learning. This is why it keeps it personal, right? Because we're going back to the student and being very student-centered in this. Rubrics should also be written so that students can clearly understand what in the world you are asking them to demonstrate. And if you are using a rubric that doesn't do that or can't, then have two rubrics that, mirror each other, one that's student-centered and one that's very much educator. And again, the rubric should be used as a tool for, self, for peer, for teacher formative assessment, right? We're all trying to basically reflect on what is happening and how I can learn and do better next time and how I can better demonstrate my learning. So in terms of a checklist, this is where you either have something or you don't. And so these two things, when we're talking rubrics and checklists, can actually help to create something that is more representative of what students have learned. So a checklist is a list of characteristics with a place marking whether the characteristic is there or not. It can be just used if you need to know if a student has actually included something or not. It's helpful for students to make sure they're following directions, and this is going to help increase the quality of a project. So something very simple as, do you have all of these bits of this presentation? And notice this is a self-reflection, right? It is, and then there's a place down at the bottom for feedback. Like if you don't have all of these things, well, like, what are you going to do to like fix this, right? How are you going to show that you've learned from these things that you are currently missing, right? How are you pushing your learning forward? What I really like to also point out is that sometimes kids have misconceptions, and they might think they have an introduction slide when they really don't, right? So it's a great place to educate them. So when you pair these things together, a rubric and a corresponding checklist, the rubric is going to focus on the learning outcomes, what you want your students to be able to demonstrate, right? You're not giving them a test. You're not saying, here's a multiple choice test, and this is going to demonstrate your learning. No, you are giving them the option to demonstrate their learning by meeting these particular standards, but maybe done in 3 or 4 different ways, right? Christy talks about choice boards. There's an opportunity. And your checklist is really just going to help refine the work and remind students all of these little tidbits that they might need to have in order to increase the quality. So if you want to do a really insane deep dive into rubrics, this is a wonderful book. We've used this. I feel like I've been in and out of it for the last 6 years, but it's got a great, it's really helpful in terms of really making sure that the rubrics that you say you have are actual rubrics and not checklists, because it is very easy to do. Christy and I talk about all the time how it is very difficult to write a rubric that is not a checklist. So it does take some practice. Okay, self and peer feedback, or self and peer reflection and peer feedback. So really just reflection in and of itself is really awesome because it can help students demonstrate their learnings while also providing an opportunity for teacher feedback, right? Like I'm thinking about what happened and I'm reflecting on how I could do better, things that were great, ways that maybe I would change something, right? And then therefore, now I'm going to make changes in the future, right? I have learned a thing. It allows students more opportunities to practice reflection, builds it into the classroom community, and places a value on the importance of practicing reflection with an effort to improve, right? And to do better. So peer feedback gives students an opportunity to assess and implement new information in an effort to improve, right? So I'm gathering information from somebody and I'm going, oh yeah, no, that's good. That's going to help me. What it really does is stop the whole, I've completed this thing and that's it, right? It helps move the learning forward because there should be an emphasis on trying to gather feedback to make a thing that we're doing that much better, right? We're learning from that process. When our team goes through a slide deck, we get feedback so that we create a better product. And this is one of those things that, that action helps our students in the classroom. And also as like a tidbit, it can be helpful for another formative assessment. So in terms of feedback, though, it is very specific, meaning it needs to be kind, specific, and helpful. If your students are struggling with what that looks like, well, what nice advice would they give their friends in terms of doing better? And also feedback can be also particularly hard for students because they sometimes don't know how to give, helpful feedback. So it's important to give them prompts and statements, such as maybe next time you could, or I liked this specific thing because of this. So just keep that in mind because it takes practice for students to get good at giving helpful feedback. There are a bunch of different types of strategies. You could implement for reflection exit tickets with prompts, right? Like what went really well for me this week? What would I do differently next week? We've got teachers that have used Kahoot, Blooket, quizzes, all of those variety of online quizzes for students to help reflect, self-assess their understanding of content by holding up, a certain number of fingers. 1, I don't understand what we're talking about. 5, I got it. And a like, I wonder, I worry is also great for new content or experiences that you're having in your classroom. And then student team share outs to talk about, like, how as a team, how have we had challenges and successes, and what are our next steps for next week? Feedback strategies, Debbie talked about Rose Thornbud. There's also a really great one called Thinking Hats, which helps give certain perspectives on giving feedback. The ladder of feedback, which can be done between 2 partners and could actually be done within a buddy journal, where you have 2 students that have the same journal and they pass it back and forth, responding to prompts and responding to what each of them wrote and giving each other suggestions. So those could be used in a variety of ways to, again, help students to demonstrate that they are learning. There are many different ways that students can demonstrate their learning. The link in here is a huge list that we actually got from California area school district, because students can learn or can demonstrate their learnings in a variety of ways. And so, your traditional types of tests are not really great. Not everyone is good at those essays. I was not. So, to keep tests as multiple choice, short answer, and essay form, you're going to miss students there because that's not to everybody's strength. So definitely take a look at this list. If you got other ideas, add to it, please do. So if we're talking about something that you could do next week, offer students a choice board of products that they can create to showcase their learnings at the end of a unit and give them a flexible due date. Try that, right? Look critically at a rubric you currently use, check to make sure that your rubric does everything a rubric should do. It's not a checklist, right? If you've got aspects of a rubric that's a checklist, pull those out, pair them together. Ask students to complete a reflective exit ticket, giving a glow and a grow on their weekly learning progress. How are they doing? So those are just a couple of ways that you can implement, how students can demonstrate their learnings over the course of, the time that you spend with them. Okay, we are done. We've gone through all 6 elements. And I want to say thank you, everyone, for being able to stay with us. We will be sending out the link to this. So if at any point you, zoned out, we got you. It's okay. So as we said, here are the key elements of personalized learning, right? We just went through all of these. Do you have any additional questions about different ways that you can personalize learning for your students? We always like to check in and just see where we can clear up any questions you might have. No? Okay. If at any point you're noodling on something, feel free to email us. If this whole concept is like, oh my goodness, we're here to help, I like to say we're aggressively helpful. So just reach out at any time. We are all about helping you in your professional development, consulting. We definitely do project-based learning training, which we've got a couple of folks on here today that have been involved in that. Support for district-based leadership teams. We help facilitate with educators to find ways to implement personalized student-centered learning, building skill building, fostering a sense of belonging for students, right? All of these types of focus will help with personalized learning. And then we've got a whole bunch of free resources. Erin actually put in the chat the link to our human-centered design explainer videos, but we also have project-based learning videos, career journeys videos, and snack and learn, which are really just interviews with professionals and kind of what their career paths were, and what skills did they need and what did they learn. So really great for our students. Here are our emails. And thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.